Hello, everyone. Am I an optimist or a pessimist? Now, the reason why I'm answering this question is that I saw an interview with a movie director where he was asked that question. I thought, well, how would I answer that question? Well, I find that it can be dangerous to be overly naive or optimistic because then you will often be disappointed when things don't go according to plan or your way. Whereas if you expect the worst thing to happen, if things go well, you will be pleasantly surprised. But as someone who hopes for the best but expects the worst, I always hope that I'm wrong. I'm the kind of pessimist, so to speak, that I want to be wrong, but quite often I'm not. That's what kind of like when you say, when some people have told me, how can you be so pessimistic about this or how someone might treat you or this? Well, I'm like, well, you can prove me wrong, but I don't think you're going to. And I would very much like to be wrong, but I often am not wrong. And so that's my philosophy: is hope for the best, but expect the worst. Now, as it pertains to my work, because sometimes one's one's worldview or outlook on life doesn't always correspond with how their work is. But in my case, I find that overly optimistic endings can come off as too cheesy and sentimental. I think some of the worst endings in books and in writing and to stories, movies in general, is when you have an ending where everything turns out well, where all the characters get together and there's some kind of marriage or they do a little dance. Now that's all fine and well. I wish for and hope for things like that in life, but from a dramatic point of view, it doesn't make for very good storytelling, in my opinion. So that's why some of my endings, some endings are almost entirely bleak because sometimes life is entirely bleak, but also, but in some cases, they're what you might call bittersweet, where the characters go through a lot of pain. Some, of course, may have to sacrifice themselves along the way, but there's still hope for the future in the end, even if it's hard to see it. And so some endings are bittersweet. I actually think bittersweet endings are kind of the best endings because they get the balance completely right. Again, I am all for sentimental romantic endings in life, which of course most of the time life isn't like that, but I hope for that. But they don't make for the best drama in stories, in my opinion. Sometimes if a character has gone through like a whole lot, like for example, It's a Wonderful Life has basically a really happy ending, but the character of George Bailey, which when he found out he was never born, and then he goes through and he sees what life would have been like if he had never been born, and he goes through all these emotional trials. He basically earned his happy ending. Sometimes I feel that overly happy endings can feel too sentimental because they weren't earned, because the characters didn't go through the proper amount of strife and struggle to earn that happy ending. And so I think that if you're going to have an overly sentimental happy ending, the character must earn it by suffering a lot along the way. Um, and so, but I tend to prefer bittersweet endings. But but overtly happy endings can work if the characters have suffered a lot, because then you feel for the characters when they finally get what they want. So that's my perspective on optimism and pessimism.